For thousands of years, people have used a single plant in many different ways. At different times in history, it has been used as medicine, as fiber, for clothing and rope, in religious rituals, and later, as something feared and misunderstood. That plant is cannabis, more commonly known today as marijuana. In recent years, marijuana has returned to the center of public conversation. You may hear about medical marijuana, recreational legalization, changing state laws, and new federal decisions, often all at once. For many older adults, this can feel confusing and even overwhelming. The rules seem to change quickly, the language can be unclear, and the information is often presented in a way that feels rushed or political. This video is not about telling you what to do or what choices to make. It is not about promoting marijuana, and it is not about discouraging it either. Instead, this video is about understanding where marijuana came from historically, why it became illegal for so long, and why the conversation around it has begun to change again, especially in the last few years. Today, we will calmly walk through the story of marijuana in a clear and balanced way. We will look at its long history, how laws shaped public opinion, what science has discovered, and what recent federal changes actually mean. Particularly for people over the age of 60, there is no pressure here, no judgment, and no urgency. Just information, presented slowly and clearly. To understand where we are today, we need to begin at the beginning. Marijuana is not a modern invention, and it is not a recent discovery. Cannabis has been used by human societies for at least 5,000 years. In ancient China, records describe cannabis being used to help relieve pain and inflammation. In India, it played a role in spiritual practices and traditional medicine. In parts of the Middle East and Africa, cannabis was used both socially and medically, depending on the culture and the time period. In early American history, cannabis was not considered dangerous or controversial. Hemp, which comes from the same plant family, was widely grown and used for rope, sails, clothing, and paper. In fact, hemp farming was encouraged in the American colonies, and it was viewed as an ordinary agricultural crop. For most of human history, cannabis was simply a plant. It was not feared, criminalized, or associated with moral panic. That perception began to change in the early 20th century, particularly in the United States. During this time, marijuana became linked to immigration fears, racial stereotypes, and political agendas rather than scientific evidence. By the 1930s, marijuana was being portrayed in newspapers and films as dangerous and corrupting, often without factual support. This fear-based messaging continued for decades. In 1970, marijuana was classified by the federal government as a Schedule I, a drug under the Controlled Substances Act. This meant it was officially labeled as having no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, placing it in the same legal category as heroin. This classification made scientific research extremely difficult. Medical studies were restricted, funding was limited, and public understanding was shaped more by law than by science. However, research did not stop entirely. Over time, scientists discovered that our body has a natural endocannabinoid system, which plays a role in regulating pain, appetite, mood, and sleep. This discovery raised important questions about whether marijuana truly had no medical value at all. Slowly, evidence began to challenge the long-held assumptions, setting the stage for the changes we see today. Medical marijuana refers to the use of cannabis or cannabis-derived products under medical supervision to manage specific symptoms or conditions. It is not the same as recreational marijuana, and it is not prescribed casually. In states where it is legal, medical marijuana typically requires a doctor's recommendation and is used within defined limits. Over the past several decades, doctors and researchers have studied marijuana primarily for symptom management rather than cures. Medical marijuana has most often been studied in relation to chronic pain, nausea related to chemotherapy, muscle spasticity in conditions such as multiple sclerosis, appetite loss, and certain seizure disorders. In these cases, marijuana is not viewed as a replacement for standard medical care, but as an option when other treatments have not worked well. One reason marijuana attracted medical interest is because of the discovery of the body's endocannabinoid system. This system plays a role in regulating pain, appetite, inflammation, mood, and sleep. Compounds in marijuana, particularly THC and CBD, interact with this system in specific ways. This does not mean marijuana works the same for everyone, or that it is risk-free, but it explains why some people experience symptom relief. It is also important to understand what medical marijuana is not. It is not a cure-all, and it does not work equally for every condition. Dosage, method of use, and individual health factors matter greatly. For older adults in particular, medical marijuana can interact with other medications, including blood pressure drugs, heart medications, sleep aids, and anxiety medications. This is one reason medical supervision is critical. In short, medical marijuana exists because research showed potential benefits in limited, specific situations. It is a medical tool, not a lifestyle product, and its use requires careful consideration, especially for seniors managing multiple health conditions. In December 2025, the federal government made a significant change in how marijuana is classified under the Controlled Substances Act. Marijuana was moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. This change has been widely reported, but often without clear explanation, leading many people to believe marijuana was fully legalized. That is not accurate. To understand the change, it helps to understand what drug scheduling means. Schedule 1 substances are defined as having no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Schedule 3 substances are still controlled, but they are recognized as having accepted medical uses and a lower risk profile compared to Schedule 1 drugs. Other Schedule 3 drugs include certain prescription medications that are regulated, but legally used in medical settings. By moving marijuana to Schedule 3, the federal government officially acknowledged that marijuana has medical utility. This is the first time the federal system has formally recognized medical value for cannabis. However, marijuana remains a controlled substance, and recreational use is still regulated, primarily at the state level. The change does not legalize marijuana nationwide for recreational use, and it does not override state laws where marijuana remains illegal. One of the most immediate effects of this change involves research. Under Schedule 1, researchers faced heavy restrictions, complex approval processes, and limited access to study materials. Schedule 3 status reduces many of these barriers, making it easier for scientists to conduct clinical trials. This is expected to lead to more standardized research and potentially more FDA-approved cannabis-derived medications in the future. Another major effect involves taxation. Previously, cannabis businesses operating legally under state law were subject to a federal tax rule known as IRS Section 280E, which prevented them from deducting normal business expenses. Schedule 3 classification removes this restriction, significantly reducing tax burdens for medical marijuana businesses. This change affects the industry far more than individual consumers, but it explains why the announcement received widespread attention. For seniors, the key takeaway is this: the 2025 change is primarily about regulation, research, and medical recognition. It does not require anyone to change their personal views or habits. It does not mean marijuana is suddenly recommended or appropriate for everyone. It means the federal government has adjusted its position to better align with existing medical evidence and ongoing research. For older adults, the recent changes around marijuana raise very practical questions. Does this mean doctors will recommend it more often? Is it safer now? And does this change anything about how seniors should think about marijuana in their own lives? The most important point is this: the federal change does not automatically change medical advice. Doctors still rely on clinical evidence, individual health history, and existing treatments when making recommendations. Marijuana is not suddenly a first-line option for pain, sleep, or anxiety, especially for older adults who may already be taking multiple medications. That said, the shift to Schedule 3 may affect seniors indirectly over time. As research becomes easier to conduct, doctors will have access to better data about dosage, effectiveness, and safety for older populations. This matters because seniors are often underrepresented in medical studies, and clearer research can lead to more informed decisions. It is also important to understand that marijuana affects aging bodies differently than younger ones. Changes in metabolism, balance, memory, and reaction time mean that seniors may experience stronger effects from smaller amounts. What feels mild to a younger person may feel overwhelming to someone older, especially when combined with other medications or health conditions. For seniors who already use or are considering medical marijuana, communication with healthcare providers is essential. Doctors and pharmacists need to know about all substances being used, including marijuana, CBD products, and over-the-counter supplements. This helps prevent interactions and unintended side effects. In practical terms, the 2025 change does not require seniors to rethink their personal choices. It simply means that marijuana is being treated more like other regulated medical substances, with increased emphasis on research, oversight, and medical context, rather than blanket prohibition. While marijuana is often discussed in positive terms, especially in the media, it is important to address risks honestly, particularly for older adults. Like any substance that affects the brain and nervous system, marijuana can cause side effects that are more pronounced with age. One of the most significant concerns for seniors is balance and coordination. Marijuana can increase the risk of dizziness, slowed reaction time, and impaired judgment. For older adults, this raises the risk of falls, which can have serious consequences. Even small changes in balance can matter greatly as we age. Cognitive effects are another concern. Marijuana can temporarily affect attention, short-term memory, and concentration. While these effects may be mild for some people, they can be disruptive for seniors who already experience age-related memory changes or who are managing conditions such as mild cognitive impairment. Medication interactions are especially important. Marijuana can interact with blood pressure medications, heart medications, blood thinners, sleep aids, anxiety medications, and pain relievers. These interactions can amplify side effects or reduce the effectiveness of prescribed treatments. Edible products can be particularly unpredictable because their effects are delayed and harder to control. Method of use also matters. Smoking marijuana carries risks to lung health, especially for individuals with respiratory conditions. Edibles and oils avoid smoke, but introduce other challenges, such as delayed onset and difficulty judging dosage. What feels like nothing is happening at first can later become too strong, particularly for seniors. These risks do not mean marijuana is never appropriate. They mean that careful consideration is required. Age, overall health, medication use, and personal tolerance all play a role. This is why medical guidance is critical, and why one person's experience should never be assumed to apply to everyone else. Understanding risks does not mean fear. It means informed decision-making, which is especially important as we get older, and our bodies respond differently than they once did. One of the most confusing parts of marijuana discussion is the difference between THC and CBD. These two compounds both come from the cannabis plant, but they affect the body in very different ways. Understanding this difference is especially important for older adults. THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, is the compound responsible for the high associated with marijuana. It affects perception, coordination, memory, and reaction time. THC is the primary reason marijuana can impair balance or judgment. For some medical patients, THC may help with pain or nausea, but it also carries the greatest risk for side effects, especially in older adults. CBD, or cannabidiol, does not produce a high. It does not significantly affect perception or coordination in the same way THC does. CBD has been studied for potential effects related to inflammation, anxiety, and certain seizure disorders. Because it does not cause intoxication, CBD is often viewed as more approachable, particularly by seniors. However, non-intoxicating does not mean risk-free. CBD can still interact with medications, especially blood thinners and certain heart drugs. Another source of confusion is product labeling. CBD products may still contain small amounts of THC, depending on how they are made and regulated. This is one reason it is important to understand the source of any product. and to discuss use with a healthcare provider. For seniors, the key distinction is this: THC affects the brain and balance more directly, while CBD does not cause intoxication, but still affects the body's chemistry. Neither should be used casually, without understanding potential interactions and side effects. Knowing the difference allows older adults to better interpret medical advice and claims. Despite headlines suggesting major legalization, many important things did not change with the 2025 federal rescheduling of marijuana. Understanding these limits helps prevent misunderstandings and unrealistic expectations. First, marijuana is still illegal under federal law for recreational use. States continue to set their own rules, meaning marijuana remains illegal in some states and restricted in others. Federal rescheduling does not override state laws, and it does not grant new rights to individuals where marijuana remains prohibited. Second, marijuana use is still restricted in many settings. Federal housing policies, certain workplaces, and transportation across state lines remain governed by federal rules. This means that even in states where marijuana is legal, use may still be prohibited in specific circumstances. Third, insurance coverage did not suddenly change. Medicare and most private insurers do not cover marijuana products. The rescheduling may eventually lead to FDA-approved medications derived from cannabis, but that process takes years and requires rigorous clinical trials. Finally, the rescheduling does not mean marijuana is recommended or appropriate for everyone. Doctors are not required to prescribe or recommend it, and many will continue to rely on existing treatments that have longer safety records, especially for older adults. In short, the 2025 change adjusted how marijuana is classified for research and regulation. It did not remove legal boundaries, eliminate risks, or mandate changes in medical practice. The story of marijuana in 2025 is less dramatic than many headlines suggest, but it is still meaningful. After decades of being classified as having no medical value, marijuana has been formally recognized at the federal level as having legitimate medical use. This shift reflects changes in scientific understanding, rather than a sudden cultural reversal. For seniors, the most important takeaway is clarity. The federal change does not require anyone to change their habits, opinions, or medical decisions. It does not mean marijuana is safer for everyone, nor does it mean it is now recommended as a routine treatment. It means that research barriers have been lowered, and that future medical guidance will be based on stronger evidence. Older adults should continue to approach marijuana the same way they approach any medical decision: cautiously, thoughtfully, and with professional guidance. Age, health conditions, medications, and personal tolerance all matter. What works for one person may not be appropriate for another. Understanding marijuana today is about separating facts from headlines. It is about knowing what has changed, what has not, and where. Reliable medical guidance still applies. With clear information, seniors can make informed decisions without pressure or confusion. That understanding, not advocacy or fear, is the goal of this conversation. If this helped clarify what actually changed and what didn't, feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for spending your time with me today. I'll see you in the next video.